Find a new way to live in Toronto's coveted Forest Hill neighborhood. Foray by Canderel blends thoughtful, livable suite design with refined finishes and more than 50,000 square feet of amenities, including wellness spaces, work-from-home areas, fitness facilities, and places to unwind. A modern, elevated community crafted for the life you've earned. Your next home starts from $599,000. Learn more at live@foray.ca. That's live at FORET.ca.
As flags are raised at city halls across Canada in honor of Yom ha-Atzmaut, the question arises about the role that cities play in communal as well as foreign politics. Should cities be neutral? Is that the ideal or just the best we can get right now? How do we even define neutrality on these topics? Join us as we discuss this and much more. I'm Avi Feingold, and along with Yedida Eisenstadt and Matthew Leibel, we are Not in Heaven. Hey, how's it going?
Hi.
Nice to see you too. Nice to see you.
How's back to a normal life rhythm for you?
Interesting. I had 5 full work days last week. Leibel, Remibi, how was Yom HaZikaron at the center, the Sunken?
So we're taping this on Yom HaZikaron, and like last week, I've come off doing our Yom HaZikaron assembly, and this one's always super challenging for me because I've never been to Israel for Yom HaZikaron before, and it always feels like there's a little separation from something authentic. So I was talk about this, the difference between Remembrance Day for me as a Canadian versus Remembrance Day from every story I've ever heard from someone in Israel. And just this idea that kind of like with Yom HaShoah, Remembrance Day in Canada, to me, even when I was a kid, and certainly now, feels far away. Right? In Flanders Fields, which is like the poem for Canadian Remembrance Day, is stuck 100 years ago. Not stuck, but that's where it's from, right? And so it feels like an older thing, and they're always talking about how there's fewer and fewer veterans from these long wars, and it feels like it's a celebration about World War II and a long, long time ago. Whereas Israeli Remembrance Day, as we know, feels like it's every day, and not just because there's a war now, but there's always people. Every family is connected. And the other thing is that it's so many times it's like a 20-year-olds and 21-year-olds, and it's just so, not that that's not for Remembrance Day, but it feels so much closer to me and my soul, and just hard to feel authentic, hard to relate to, and yet also so painful and so difficult. And so I'm just coming off of that, but everyone really responded well to it. So it's all kind of mixed up for me right now.
Yeah, I've always liked how Israel connects the two, in this deliberate manner of putting Yom HaZikaron, that in the sense that you cannot have the Atzmaut, you cannot have the independence without recognizing first that there were many people who gave their lives for this, and tie it together. The Tekes Ma'avar, the transition ceremony that you see in Israel, where they go from the end of Yom HaZikaron straight into Yom Ha'atzmaut, the definition of Me'afela le'or gadol, right, from the depths of the darkness to the great. It's way, way better of a system than separating them and doing it Canada Day and then, Remembrance Day.
Well, you nailed it. It's that's the quintessential Jewish teaching right there. And you got to do the grieving first, right? That annual symbolism is so powerful.
Do you remember last year we talked about the Yoms, right? And how this is a phenomenon? I heard this year that some people are referring to it as the Aseret Yemei Hoda, right? The 10 days of gratitude.
I like that.
And that it starts with Yom HaShoah, and which we're grateful for the people who resisted, and we remember that, and then it goes all the way to the gratitude of Yom HaZikaron and Yom Ha'atzmaut.
10 days of gratitude, Aseret Yemei HaHoda. I like that. I like that too. It's better than just calling it the Yums.
Are you guys going to ceremonies tonight, like the ones that Avi just mentioned, or barbecue, or what are you doing?
My focus is trying to be the facilitator for our facility-wide Yom HaAtzmaut bingo.
So I was going to say, do you do a whole big
Well, bingo is very, very popular in the nursing home.
Yes.
This year they're letting me do a themed bingo. Usually it's the numbers and you don't mess with tradition, but this is going to be an Israel themed instructional bingo where I'm supposed to provide narration and trivia and fun stories as we go along. And they're going to have like the largest attendance for. There's a lot that's making me very nervous. So my Yom Ha'atzmaut, I'm very nervous about the pressure of pulling off Yom Ha'atzmaut bingo. So no celebrations for me.
Yeah, tomorrow morning the other girls have their like play their whatever Yom Ha'atzmaut thing. So we'll probably go to that, and that'll probably be the extent of my celebration. I'll daven with Hallel and see my kids' thing. The thing I dislike very, very much is that the only thing you can manage to find to eat at any Yom Ha'atzmaut celebration is a falafel. And everybody knows that falafel made en masse with like trays and trays of falafel balls are just awful. They're just not good.
I think it's barbecue chicken.
I would hope for that. I wish.
Incredible. I'm with Avi.
So I have another question for Avi, though. So, Avi, a minute ago, you mentioned that you will be saying Hallel tomorrow. So, with or without a bracha, to get personal,
Oof.
And like, how have you made that decision in your life?
I feel like because when I was in yeshiva, there was none of that, right?
Really?
Yeah, in yeshiva gedola, it's
you didn't say it. Oh, when you were growing up in Montreal.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I gotcha.
And then when I started, I remember reading that like, oh, you see, maybe we do it without a bracha, and then there's more of a reason to do it with a bracha on Yom Yerushalayim because the miracle happened on one day, right? And we've heard these types of arguments, but now I think I recognize that these are big miracles, and we should just say the bracha on both of those days and be done. What do you do, Yedida? We haven't gotten to you. Not Hallel wise. I mean, Yom Ha'atzmaut in general.
Not much. After I drop the kids tomorrow morning, I will try to get to shul for davening and see if that happens. And no, for my daughter, tomorrow's blue and white day for maybe the beginning of a color war or just like a day of Yom Ha'atzmaut festivities. And then Thursday is real color war for them. So they're instilling all of the warm feelings, and it's the shlichim, it's the bnot sheirut from Israel who will be running all of that, giving them the real sort of like Israeli experience in Ketmil. I think what you really want to hear about, when I was in my super Zionist seminary gap year, I remember that the bnot sheirut, the Israelis who like lived with us as our counselors, made us all like mixtapes and gave them to us, I think, on Yom Ha'atzmaut. And the school made a whole seminary and gave all of the, I guess, like the graduating gap year students a Yom Ha'atzmaut machzor.
Oh, that's nice.
So that was very moving to, 19-year-old, less historically minded, less critically minded Yedida. And like on Yom Ha'atzmaut, I like to just sort of hark back to that and be naive again for a minute. And like, that's, I think, my way of honoring the people who have made the modern state of Israel and its miracles possible. And then like the other days of the year, I go back to overthinking it.
Fair enough. I think that's a good way to put it. Speaking of overthinking Yom Ha'atzmaut, let's get to our main topic. On Yom Ha'atzmaut, across the country and across many other places in the world, flags are raised. I think it's a distinctly North American thing where you go to City Hall and you see the flag raised of whatever country, meaning on Peruvian National Day, Independence Day, they raise the Peruvian flag. So whatever it might be. So the Israeli flag is going up in Toronto on Yom Ha'atzmaut this year, very likely for the last time. As the Toronto City Council voted last month to end the practice of raising any foreign flags, right? The idea was to end divisiveness and to, quote unquote, reduce the temperature. And what they're referring to is the fact that for the past several years, it has become a flashpoint. There was a big stink raised by the Jewish community when the Palestinian flag was raised last November. And we see this happening across the country, that people are trying to sort of take a step back. Calgary is not has decided also not to have flags anymore at City Hall. What this brings up for me is the fact that cities seem to be getting involved in foreign affairs, whether they like it or not. And that's a big question. I want to start. So I guess the first question I want to ask is, should cities be neutral, or should they stick to like administrating the city's infrastructure, the day-to-day operations, stuff like that, and then leave any of the international politics, the local politics aside and say that's not what we do?
So should Canadian cities be like Switzerland?
Yeah, sure.
That's the Switzerland thing.
I mean, I say in scare quotes that like, so, I mean, I'm challenging the entire idea of neutrality there. Why do people want their flags raised at City Hall? It's not, I don't think, as a like statement of supporting Uganda or Angola, right? Like, I don't think that it's a statement of supporting the governments of those foreign countries. I don't think it's a statement of global affairs.
To put up a flag at City Hall, what's it doing there?
Well, so one of the things that makes Canada great is the celebration of diversity, and that most people came to Canada from somewhere else. And so it's like a celebration of the many different cultures in Canada. I think it's about
that would be if they were like randomly putting up a flag every single different day. But if you're trying to come up with thematic reasons, then you're saying that you've got, and then you're making statements. And again, it just goes back to the same thing. Like, well, why do we need that? Well, what is the point that they're trying to make? Like, you can celebrate diversity with festivals.
I think that there's this public affirmation. Again, I'm not saying that I necessarily agree with it. To answer your question more specifically, Matthew, I think that the point of that is that people feel a lot of pride when they see an official recognition of a group that they are part of, right? Brazilians might be a minority in Toronto, but when they see their flag raised, on an important day, they're like, oh, right, I feel like I belong here. And there's something there, both culturally belong here and, politically belong here. And this is like it's an acknowledgement of my past while I'm still living in my present. And I think that there's something powerful and strong about that. And I think that until, it was relatively unpolitical, where it was mainly a cultural thing, it was fine. And people got a lot of pride and it was kind of harmless. Ideally, I would love everybody to go back to it's a cultural symbol, get over it.
Right. So, but because it isn't like that, because it isn't like that right now, because you can't put up the Israeli flag.
And that's why the politicians are saying we're not going to put up any flags, and we're going to hope that the temperature comes down.
Right.
I feel naive as saying, like, taking this position, and it is much more complicated than this. And I get it, but I also kind of wonder, like, why are we not taking these opportunities to, everybody's so busy protesting the other side rather than like setting up a booth for dialogue or like recognition or seeing the other person's humanity, right? Like, I think that one of the things here is that like, there's this acknowledgement that raising a group's flag, right? Like Avi just said, right? So it's visibility, right? Everybody wants to be seen. Everybody wants like their humanity recognized. And it also in Canada is a like, this group now belongs here, right? This is for the Palestinian Canadians, right? They're not in Gaza and the West Bank. They are in Toronto and they are part of the fabric of Canada. So it's a recognition of all those different pieces. Flags are really interesting because they are symbols. And like some flags are more contentious than others, right? I remember as a young person starting to travel the world, my parents were like, you must wear a Canadian flag pin. Everybody loves Canadians and everybody will be nice to you, right? So like the Canadian flag, of course, the Canadian flag, like it means something out in the world, usually something, everybody loves Canada and everybody loves to make fun of Canadians. So there's that, but I think that flags and like lots of other symbols also kind of become Rorschach tests. And I want to acknowledge that the Israeli flag and the Palestinian flag mean different things to these different groups of people. And I know as a Israel in all its complexity loving Canadian American Jew, I know what the Israeli flag means to me, but I also can acknowledge that it has become a fraught symbol all over the world, right or wrong, and that a Palestinian Canadian has a different relationship to the Israeli flag than I do, in the same way that I have a different relationship to the Palestinian flag than a young Palestinian Canadian does. And one thing that I think that is bad for the Jewish people today and for Jewish Canadians is we have to be careful about imposing our interpretation of the Palestinian flag or our understanding and emotional experience of that and saying that like that's the universal meaning in the same way that I would like other people to understand that like what the Israeli flag represents to me isn't necessarily what it represents to them, right? Like symbols are fraught. That's why they're symbols. They have meanings and they have different meanings to different groups. And I think that we should insist that like our meaning be seen and heard, right? Like we shouldn't let other people control the meaning of our symbols, especially, for example, a Chanukiah lighting.
Yeah, look, I'm all for the idea that we should have pride in our symbols. I'll give you a great example. I didn't quite understand what the Ukrainian flag was until the start of the Ukrainian war, and I started seeing the symbol, independent of it being in a flag, in a variety of places as like a stand-in, the same way that a maple leaf is the stand-in for the Canadian flag. Now, do I think that the Ukrainian flag should go up on, very special Ukrainian days? Sure, only if you're going to welcome the fact that there are plenty of Russians who are pro-Russia who live in Toronto and Montreal and Winnipeg, and they're going to want to say, hey, maybe we should put the Russian flag up, and then, we get into this problem of what we're talking about.
Exactly.
But they didn't go to City Hall and say, I'm going to cut off my nose to spite my face, and I am going to make it so that I can't raise the Israeli flag just so that you can't raise the Palestinian flag.
Yeah, that's where I both agree with the end result, and I think that the people that are doing this or that are behind this are so like, oh, we can't play nice, well, nobody's going to have any toys. It just feels so icky to me. To be fair, to understand the Palestinian side, to them, it was always icky to see the Israeli flag. And for us, it was just neutral and like innocuous. Oh, that's kind of nice. And only in the last 5 years has there been this recognition. Oh, it's really, really complicated and messy, right? It wasn't a big deal when the mayor of Montreal, I don't know if mayor of Montreal ever did, but would walk in the, Israel Day parade. Right. But I get where it could be messy.
It puts politicians in an impossible situation when we ask them to have positions beyond what's actually relevant for local politics. But in thinking about this, focusing on anything outside of like city affairs and sort of drawing the center of local politics away from the locality is really fraught, in my opinion, right? Like we shouldn't be forcing people to take positions on Israel and Palestine and whatever like doesn't have to do with local educational curriculums and garbage pickup. Let local politics, I think, be local. But this is relevant for local politics because there is resurgent anti-Semitism and because Canadian Jews feel like they are under attack because of this war in Israel and now Iran and like the world spinning out of control. And I sympathize with the impossible positions of the politicians, but also sometimes they make their own beds.
Way back in the day, when somebody asked Michael Jordan to endorse a candidate for president, obviously they assumed he was going to endorse a Democratic candidate for president in the United States. And he looked at them, he says, he doesn't do that. And he's like, well, why? And he says, well, Republicans buy sneakers too.
Yeah.
And the idea that like, if you're the mayor of everybody in this city, you have to in some way be the mayor for all these people. The question then that I'm realizing is what happens when you actually have what you think is a principled stand, but also how do I convey that to the world and to the community while assuring them that that's not going to affect what goes on right in the day-to-day running of City Hall. Right. The two examples that I can think of is Zohran Mamdani and Olivia Chow to a certain extent, who have expressed very specific politics about Israel, about Zionism, about the Palestinian cause. And then you look at Hampstead Mayor. Hampstead in Montreal is a town of 7,000 people. And the mayor on October 8th put up the Israeli flag, said, I'm not taking it down. I'm leaving it at half-mast until all of the hostages are home. And he got into a lot of flack for it. And he goes, I'm unapologetically Zionist. I'm Jewish. I love Israel. And I'm not going to argue for it. But then there were people that were like, how does that make me feel if I don't believe in your politics as the mayor? But at the end of the day, how do you balance that with one's own principled stances?
I just don't think they apply within civic politics, though. It's the time and the place. Like that. Look, I love that he did that, but I don't think that he can do that. I don't think he should be doing that. Well, that's an abuse of like what City Hall is supposed to be. Like, why does City Hall have an opinion on this right now? City Hall should have an opinion on the things Yadida mentioned. The roads. The taxes.
Well, yes and no, because honestly, like cities do have foreign affairs that they deal with where they're trying to attract foreign investors all the time. It's like, you're expanding, you're an Israeli company, you're expanding to Canada, come build in my town. In that sense, there is some space for foreign affairs in city politics.
As they relate to business relating to the city. I think just a blanket statement of putting up a flag, you'd have to try and convince me why that is a city, why that matters to the city people. But like attracting business for the city, you should be attracting good business for the city. Yeah, of course, that's fine.
Like, you know what? Like the elected ones have a bit of an out in that they say, well, I was elected. I could say what I want on behalf of like what I believe. And that's partially true and partially not true. And the elected official still has to represent people that they don't like. And they should know well enough to say, hey, Republicans buy sneakers too. I have people in my community who are like this. Jeremy Levi gets to say to himself, you know what? The vast majority of people in my community want the Israeli flag up. I'm going to keep it up there, even if 5 or 10 people don't want it up. Right. And that's his prerogative. And I'm not going to argue with him one way or another. But I think when you're actually asking the question, should we do this? I think that, yes, erring on the side of neutrality is always, I think, the better way.
Well, so I'll get back to neutrality in a minute. I think that another thing is that politicians have to speak in sound bites because the media is going to cut up what they say and, get that sound bite that doesn't have the depth, complexity, and nuance. And like, many politicians are very smart people, not just in the realm of politics and getting votes, but like they do understand the complexity and nuance, but you can't convey that in just a soundbite. So like I want politicians who can hold both sides and understand all the symbols from the various different directions, but we don't give them that space to do that. We want them to pick a side. And I think that is hurting everybody, ultimately.
Where do you stand on neutrality, Matthew? Are you neutral on neutrality?
Everybody, for the most part, I look at right now, can't wait to tell me what they think about every single freaking thing they think about. And guess what? I wasn't interested before, and I'm not going to be interested tomorrow, which gives you a pretty good clue. I'm not interested right now. Like, I want these politicians to sit and discuss how to make the city better if that's the place where they work. And if they work at the government level at the country of Canada, I want them to fix the country of Canada. I want them to spend less time worrying about things that are happening other places unless they directly affect us.
But they do directly affect us.
They don't. A lot of this stuff is just people want to make their opinions up because it's a hot topic.
No, we do see the aftermath of October 7th and the war. Like, we're seeing violence against Jewish communities in Canada.
Yes,
so
and
what's going on over there does affect us over here. And so the world we live in now is so totally interconnected. Everything over there affects everything over here.
Right. So when there are synagogues shot up in Toronto, I think everyone's allowed to say, are you concerned about the synagogues or places of worship in your place in Canada? What are you doing about that in your place in Canada?
What this brings up for me is the fact that we are in an age where if you don't say something, you're automatically seen as a problem. And then the fact that we feel that every politician needs to have an opinion about this. And I'm like, you'd be so much better as an individual if you stopped thinking about, well, what does my MP think about this foreign affair issue that has nothing to do with him?
But last week, we were talking about like the goals of Holocaust education. And one of the things that the lesson is don't be a bystander. So what we've done in the age of social media is we've cultivated an entire generation who now feels like they have to go on the record. But like it's armchair activism, right? Or slacktivism, right? There's so many terms for this, right? Like, what are you, like, besides for making your statement on Twitter, what else are you doing to keep X from happening, right? And one of the things that people do is elect representatives to government. And they want to elect people who will represent their interests, right? And so I think this does get to the question of like different levels of government.
I think it's funny that you bring up don't be a bystander because
that's in the Parsha.
Because it's in this week's Torah portion, which we'll get to very shortly on textual healing. But
nice plug.
Great, you brought that up. Don't be a bystander. But don't be a bystander isn't just something is happening around the world, on the other side of the world, and I have no impact on it whatsoever, and yet I'm going to go and say something about it. That's not being a bystander.
That's not the context in which that was written. I think that was written in a much more closer to home. If you're walking down the street and you hear somebody screaming, the do not be a bystander, I don't think was created for these problems beyond a local scope. I mean, it can be interpreted in the right way, sure, but I think it literally was, the difference between, I think it's American law. If you're walking down the street and you hear somebody screaming, you're not legally obligated, but the Torah says, actually, you kind of are. You heard the screaming. Like, have a heart, have a soul, be a person. But it's all a definition of like, okay, now someone's going to say to me, I hear the screaming from the other side of the world. I need to do something. Okay, but I'm going to say like you just did, show me what you're doing. Getting on the internet and make change, affect some change, make a difference.
I think if everybody has it, then that is neutral. And it's saying, look, I don't care what your cause is. I don't care what your country is. That's not the job of the city to get involved in this. That's fine. And I'm okay with it. If they don't put up the Israeli flag, no big deal, right? To me, in Montreal, the much greater symbol of Israeli pride that I have is that on every Yom Ha'Atzmaut, there are tens of thousands of people that march through downtown Montreal with flags, with music, for an hour-long, march that ends at Place du Canada with some, Hatikva, with the Consul General, with more singing and more speeches, and everybody feels joyous about it, and the whole city gets to see it. That's much more important and valuable than than a flag being raised at City Hall.
I agree. That's what I mean. It's like, and when we have these kinds of, like in Winnipeg, you have this big thing like Folklorama, where they have all these multicultural pavilions all over the city, and everybody goes. One of the highlights during the summer, which will happen later this month. Like, those are the things that make me proud as a Canadian. And Israel's got a pavilion as part of it. There's always 6 protesters outside very angrily, but the majority of people still go inside. And then everyone else has this kind of space. Like those, I feel like Canada's beauty is in the ongoing day-to-day, these moments. It doesn't all hinge on this one thing where like we raise it puts so much pressure on this one moment, this one symbol, when actually there are all these little moments all over if you look across the country that are great.
You are very glass half full, and like no, but symbols matter. Symbols matter. Symbolism matters, and like especially when you take something away that you used to have, it hurts more, right? Like if you've never tasted it, it's one thing, but like once you've become used to it, once it's become your norm,
I don't deny that at all, no, but I also recognize that the messiness is part of what we're going to have to deal with because we made it messy. Other people made it messy. Society made all of this messy, and we're figuring it out. And figuring it out doesn't take all overnight. Let's go to textual healing.
Textual healing. It's time for some textual healing. Let's get biblical. Tell me a parsha, and we'll make it physical. Textual healing. It's time for some textual healing.
All right, textual healing for the week. Ha-Atzmaut and Kedoshim, another double parsha. Lovely to have 2 short parshas so that you don't feel like it's overwhelming. Who's going to get us started? Matthew, what do you have for Ha-Atzmaut and Kedoshim?
Do you usually get overwhelmed by the parsha?
Oh, the Matot Maseh is a killer.
Yeah,
you sit there in shul and you're like, oh, I wish I brought a book.
That's why everyone takes their summer vacation right around Matot Maseh. I always found that like no one was ever in town for that one. Ha-Atzmaut Kedoshim reminds me of Yom Kippur, obviously, because the first part talks about the Yom Kippur ritual. But you want to talk about true textual healing, where you don't even need to go beyond the surface level. Kedoshim has some stretches that are by far my favorite in the entire Torah. My favorite line in the entire Torah is...
You like reading about incest.
No. No. It's got some difficult parts. I didn't say all of it was my favorite, but like chapter 19, which is when Kedoshim gets going. And by the way, you got to love the idea that if you look closely, it doesn't say you are holy because I am holy. It says you shall be holy. Holiness is not the result. Holiness is the goal. Holiness is the ongoing day-to-day striving, and the Torah, and especially these parts, are the guide. So I think anyone who's just like, we're holy, read it again. But the stretch that I love, in the middle of chapter 19, you shall not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind. Probably talked about it last year. It's my favorite line. But then it's followed up by, you shall not render an unfair decision, do not favor the poor, or show deference to the rich. Judge your kinsman fairly. Do not deal basely with your countrymen. Do not profit by the blood of your fellow. Boom, boom, boom. Like the Torah could be not, how could you be more on point 3,000 years ago and still hit like every single person listening who's guilty of that all the time? All of the time. In my day-to-day life, if those three things only were observed by everybody, we wouldn't need to worry about some of the stuff that I think we talked about in today's episode.
So you're talking to the politicians.
I'm talking to everyone. The worst part is I'm talking to myself included, right? Like that's the hardest part is that, yeah, even when you do reach holiness, tomorrow is a brand new challenge. You almost get, sometimes you get good credit for being a mensch yesterday, but if you're not a mensch today and you're not a mensch tomorrow, you're actually losing. And it's an ongoing struggle day to day to day to follow even what sounds like very simple, like these one-line bullet points, but there's so much to them. And that is my all-time favorite line. Do not put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. When I'm shopping in Dollarama with my kids for toys, and I'm looking and I see that every single one of these toys is going to break 5 minutes before, like after I buy it, even though it's cheap, I'm thinking to myself, we're living in a society where we are constantly putting stumbling blocks in front of each other all the time.
I got to say this. When we first moved to Canada, like 12 years ago, so we had really young kids, and my mom would take them to Dollarama all the time to buy like dolls, to buy whatever toys. And they would always break, like you said, and they would always end up going back for like more of them. And my daughter, from what I remember, used to think that Dollarama meant like the doll store, because that's where you go to get dolls, because you always have to need new dolls, because at Dollarama the dolls break. Yudita, what do you have for us?
Orama.
A few weeks ago, when we did our Toxic Masculinity Kiddush Club episode,
Of course.
I lamented the fact that like Kiddush clubs happen mostly during the Haftarah, and that we would all do well to listen to the words of the prophets because they continue to resonate. I want to talk about Amos. So we read from the very end of Amos, a prophet in the 8th century before the Common Era, during the time of the First Temple, before the exile of the northern tribes. He really like sort of challenges us to think about the nature of Israel's chosenness. And there's also like a distinction between the idea of chosenness in the Parsha and Amos's idea of chosenness. And like he sort of calls Israel out for their complacence, and that they are neglecting really the messages of justice that are what make us holy, right? The observance of which is what God demands when he says kadoshim to you, right? Like be holy. And you can tell from the nature of his prophecies that Israel is not observing these, and that's going to be why they will be destroyed and exiled, and they will fall. The Haftarah this week, so it contains those messages of doom, and that God will scatter Israel, and also this is where like the language for the harachaman that we say in benching on Sukkot comes from, right? That God will lift up the sukkah of David that fell, right? The fallen tabernacle. Thank you. And God will ultimately bring it back. But what I think is important here is that when you read this Haftarah and really the whole book of Amos alongside this week's Parsha, it basically says to the people living in Israel in the 8th century, like, don't rest on your laurels. Don't think that God will never punish you for your bad behavior and your lack of observance and the terrible things that you do to the poor people. And, you're enjoying your ivory beds and your fat cows while people are starving. Like, don't think that this is going unnoticed by God. And I think we should hear that. And I would also recommend that everybody there's this amazing essay from 1957 by Professor Shalom Spiegel that was delivered at a conference, including American Supreme Court justices thinking about civil rights. And it's this amazing essay that uses the prophet of Amos. And maybe we'll add a link to an excerpt in the show notes. Avi.
All right. We talked about this phrase earlier in the episode, and Matthew, you brought it up as being around there with your favorite verses there. Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa.
Oh, yeah.
Right. How did
Right
you
after,
translate
yeah.
it?
Don't stand idly by the blood of your neighbor is what is the direct, but it's gone off in a lot of different tentacles. And
so scholars point out that ta'amod, the word ta'amod, is actually not easy to translate necessarily. And this came up when I was writing a piece about social media, and the JPS translation actually translates it as "do not profit by the blood of your fellow," right? As in, like, do not earn money off of the blood of your fellow. And this comes right there are medieval commentaries that actually are aware of this, and they point out even that, like, well, the idea is that we want to remember that these two things, rechilut, right, which is tailbearing, and the lo tamod al dam re'echa, tailbearing happens in a way that sort of like works as commerce does, right? It's sold from one person to the next, and we shouldn't do rechilut, right? We shouldn't do the tailbearing in that sort of way. But then there's these commentaries that really point out something really interesting. If you really believe that it's this profiting, right, what are we trying to get at? And there are people who have misfortune in our community, right? They get shamed, right? And shame is like the blood rushing to the face. And we sometimes take advantage of that. We take advantage of their downfall, whether it's by inserting ourselves in a more advantageous place because this person is down, or we literally make money by publishing stories and printing them because other people have, fallen in that way. And, there's this really interesting way of approaching it to sort of say, hey, just because something bad is happening to somebody that and you're in a position to take advantage of it, doesn't mean that you should. And that's really what it means to not stand idly by, is that, it's to stand idly by. It's when something bad is happening to your neighbor, stand back, right, and don't take advantage of it in a way that is bad.
Don't exploit
their
vulnerability.
That's it, yes. Thank you for listening to Not in Heaven this week. Our producer and editor is Zachary Kaufman. Michael Freeman is the executive producer. To catch every episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support our show, consider making a donation to the CJN at thecjn.ca/donate.